Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of Dissecting Zeta Gundam. I am Hatter, your host, and today we have a lot to talk about because this episode is jam-packed with subtle character building moments that I want to take a look at. As always, spoiler warning, because this is going to be a deep dive analysis. Go watch the series if you haven't already and come back for the critical analysis. Let's hop right into it. Alright, so episode 2 opens with Quattro and the AU breaking into Green Noah by blasting a hole in the colony's hull. Again, Quattro's new type senses allow him to hear the heavy breathing of Kamille running away, and he mistakes that person for Amuro Ray or Lala Soon at first, before realizing that this is a person he doesn't recognize. This is like Chekhov's gun, except it's more like Chekhov's new type abilities. We're seeing a lot of them here in the first act, so we can be dang sure that the new type connections are going to play a large part in the story by the time the third act rolls around. Next, there's an extended scene where Kamille is running through the woods. Now, so far, we've seen Kamille do a lot of physical running, and given the title of this episode, Departure, we can expect him to continue running. Now, I've said before that animation is a very deliberate medium, and given the budgets of these shows, we can assume that the creators would not waste effort on these types of scenes unless they were trying to say something with them. Now, as I mentioned in the last episode, Kamille seems to be running from a lot of things: his classes, the police, his own name, maybe even his entire life. Kamille is a frenetic character that acts on impulse, and this scene is sort of a physical manifestation of that. Here's another strange localization change in the dubbed version. In the sub, Kamille simply says, "I cannot forgive those soldiers," which kind of implies that they hurt his honor or something like that, versus the dubbed version in which he says, "Soldiers, I'm gonna get them, they'll pay for this." It's such a short scene with seemingly minimal impact on the story, so why put in the extra work and add those extra lines? They definitely make Kamille sound more childlike, as opposed to the subtitled version, which has a little bit more maturity to it. So here we meet Lieutenant Emma Sheen of the Titans, and what's fascinating to me about this brief exchange is that she almost plays a foil to the Fraubo character archetype by reprimanding Jared in a way that Fa might rebuke Kamille, or Fraubo would nag Amuro. It's obviously a relationship that doesn't last throughout the series, but it's a very interesting setup and a neat change of pace to introduce a character like Emma, who will play such a large role in the future. In this short exchange between Emma and Jared, we see a lot of Jared's entitlement and arrogance. He had a first go at test flying a Gundam Mark II, and he wrecked it before Emma could have a turn. It's interesting that the dubbed version removed that context, with Emma instead saying that the maintenance teams also had to train on the Mark II, instead of saying we all need to train on the Mark II like she does in the subtitled version. Additionally, we get a little bit of positive characterization for Jared when he says that he intentionally crashed the Mark II on a military building instead of in a residential zone. Now, he's full of excuses for his behavior in this back and forth with Emma, but this one actually makes him seem like a decent guy. Finally, we get to see Bright Noah speak for the first time, and already we can tell that he has a bit of a combative relationship with the Titans even prior to the events of the show. First, he comes in yelling at Emma and Jared, and then when Jared suggests that maybe a meteorite punched a hole in the colony, Bright asks what he would know about that being from Earth. And it's a fair critique to suggest that someone from Earth probably wouldn't know much about living in the colonies. Again, we get mention of this mysterious AUG faction that the Titans clearly have some animosity for. We haven't learned anything yet about them besides that they apparently act like Zeon, according to that Titans officer. Now, to this point, Quattro and his wingmen haven't even identified themselves as being AUG members, so the suspense of actually seeing the AUG is starting to build up. Now, this is a brief sentiment from Quattro that seems to get repeated a lot, this idea of when will people learn. In this instance, he's referring to the Earthbound pilots recklessly firing their weapons inside of a colony, and I think that the dubbed localization makes this point a little bit clearer when he says, when will they learn that a colony is more fragile than Earth, as opposed to this place is not a part of Earth. In both cases, we can already see the type of exasperation that he's feeling toward people and their apparent inability to learn and grow. Now, this could be the earliest revelation of the type of characterization he gets later in Char's counterattack, but we have a long way to go before that. Next, we're treated to a couple of nice establishing shots that contrast the appearance of Green Noah to Grips 2, one being a forested suburb and the other being an industrial hub. It's Captain Bask Ulm of the Titans who first utters the name Red Comet, in a way that suggests that the Titans that are under attack on Green Noah are reporting that they are fighting Char Aznable. It's a really strange claim to make, given that it's been 7 years since anyone has last seen or heard from Char. Or maybe it's not. We as the audience don't know much of what has happened in the last 7 years, so a moment like this might be the characters revealing some things to us. Now, we'll talk later, I'm sure, about where Stardust Memory fills in a little bit of the gap, but even then, this largely seems to be an appeal to the audience rather than a realistic character moment. In this short interaction, we meet some important characters such as Bask Ulm, Jamai Khan, and Kamille Bidan, who is Camille's father. It's Bask that confirms to us that Quattro and the others are AUG members by identifying their mobile suits as such. We see that Bask is a strong, imposing presence. Not only physically, he's a mountain of a man, but also in his demeanor and restrained tone. Jamai Khan largely seems to be a typical bureaucrat just wearing a military uniform, and his response to Franklin's question is extremely indignant. As for Kamille Bidan himself, we see a bit of arrogance in how cavalier he is with the Gundam Mark II data, saying that they can have it. It's easy to see how this trait manifests itself in Camille's impulsiveness. Additionally, both he and Kamille seem to be exceptionally talented individuals, Franklin in designing mobile suits and Kamille in piloting them, as we learned in the last episode. Now we see one of the unnamed Titans pilots say how the red mobile suit is just like the Red Comet. This is less of a story or character discussion, but rather a question of lore. There are several explanations and fan theories regarding Char Aznable and his infamous 3 times faster Zaku. Now personally, I feel that the most obvious explanation is not some technical conceit like limiter removal or overclocking the mobile suit's engine, but rather just his skill that allows him to operate at a higher combat speed than other pilots. I think that is evident here since the unnamed mobile suit, the Rick DS that Quattro's using, doesn't have the same specs as Char's Red Zaku, or Char's Red Zigok, or Full Frontal Sinanju later on in the franchise. It seems far more likely that the distinction is in the pilot, not the machine, at least given what we're shown here and in the original series. Fa and her mother narrowly escape the wreckage left by some GMs that Quattro and the others destroyed, and during their evacuation we get another callback to the first series. Then it was Hayato talking about his frustrations with Side 7 becoming a Federation base, but in this instance it's Fa's mother saying how the citizens of Green Noah never wanted it to become a Titan's base. This sort of juxtaposition of the Titans and Federation and how their roles play out in their respective series not only creates a clever twist for this sequel, but also perhaps offers an alternative perspective to the events of the original. If the civilians feel the same way now about the Titans as they did 7 years ago about the Federation, did the organization really change? Have the people changed? One side is portrayed as heroes and the other oppressors, but in their deeds so far they don't seem very different from one another. Here's a brief interaction between some Federation military police officers and Kamille. It's not much, but it serves to let the audience know about Franklin being Camille's father. It also offers up a potential what-if scenario. These officers just let a civilian kid onto a military base, seemingly violating protocol. Now, one officer excuses this because of the chaos due to the air raid and the AUG attack. Additionally, they seem to extend Kamille some favorable consideration due to who his father is. Now, there's surely some conclusions to be drawn about bureaucratic privilege and Kamille getting away with a lot in the last 2 episodes because of who his parents are. But this whole story could have ended right here if these officers had stopped Kamille from entering the base and just done their job. Similar to how Amuro used the Gundam manual to learn how to operate the Gundam on the fly, we get a short explanation for Camille's familiarity with the Gundam Mark II. You see here Kamille suggests that he stole the data from his father's computer, which is very different from Amuro accidentally finding the V Project manual. Now, despite the similarities in the first 2 episodes of Gundam and Zeta Gundam, we're starting to see some distinction that makes Kamille a far less innocent kid than Amuro was. This difference in character is about to become a lot more obvious in a moment. As Bright and Emma try to avoid the falling rubble of the building coming down around them, the former comments on how Kamille seems just like Amuro, at least in his ability to operate a Gundam. But I think Bright will sort of be like a proxy for the audience throughout the series in some ways as he slowly discovers just how different Kamille is from Amuro going forward. Like I mentioned, here we see how much Kamille is not like Amuro. He is not in the Gundam to protect anyone, he's just taking out his frustration on the MP that beat him up earlier. He takes pleasure in the officer's fear and opens fire with the Gundam's head Vulcan. Even if he didn't mean to, he could have killed the man with a stray bullet and shows no remorse at all about it. This is totally a different sort of kid than Amuro and certainly not a heroic figure at all. In the brief moment when Kamille slams Kakra Khan's Gundam into a building, Bright has a new type experience that is shared with Emma. He again comments on Camille's similarity to Amuro while Emma gets a strange feeling from Kamille knowing her name. Now there's a lot to take in here because on the one hand, Emma seems to be having a subtle new type awakening of her own. Kamille knew Emma's name and rank without even thinking twice about it, as if he's unconscious of the new type awakening that he's experiencing himself. It's possible that there's simply a lot of resonance going on between Char, Bright, Emma, and Kamille all being in the same place. But if we compare this to the first time that Kai Shiden met Sayla Mass in the second episode of Gundam, it's possible that Kai was having a similar experience to Kamille in that moment, knowing Sayla's name seemingly without having met her before. It could just be a coincidence, but I like to think that this is a character moment which foreshadows a lot about Emma and Kamille, and also adds context to the previous series, since now we're able to articulate what we're seeing in the space of new type connectivity. There's a short scene where Fa is searching Camille's house and collecting items to take with her in the evacuation, and in this case I really prefer the dubbed line to the subtitled one. In the subs, she simply says that there's little point in taking the trophies and plaques, while in the dub she observes the trophies and with a sad resignation declares, "They're just things." The subtitled version is more pragmatic and cold, while the dub gives us a very human moment where Fa reflects on what's happening and wistfully confesses how these tokens of Camille's talents, which I'm sure were very important to him at the time, really don't mean anything. It's one of the sad realities of growing up, and one that's exacerbated in times of war or struggle. And then, ironically, she does grab a trophy on the way out. We get a moment where Kamille sees that his house has been destroyed by the wreckage of a GM, and we see Fa fleeing on foot, and it's set to some somber music. It's a very clear, punctuated scene where Kamille is leaving his childhood, his innocence, and his friends behind to answer this call to adventure that seems to fit really well with the Joseph Campbell hero's journey archetype. But as we talked about earlier, is Kamille really answering a call to adventure, or is he just running away? He was seemingly waiting for any excuse to leave his life behind, and this opportunity just fell into his lap. Compare this to Amuro, who was oblivious to war and content to tinker in his room. Kamille is a firebrand who likely would have got swept up in any conflict if the wrong person crossed him. We get a major kick the dog moment, literally, in which Bask and the other Titans officers beat the hell out of Bright Noah for just suggesting that their handling of the AUG and the test flight of the new Gundams was bad for public opinion. Emma gets her first taste of the Titans' brutality, and although she doesn't approve, she doesn't interfere either. Now we obviously see how cruel the Titans are, but in this scene we see Emma as reserved and by the books. She's not standing up for Bright or doing right by her conscience, as the audience can clearly see that she doesn't approve of what's going on. This gives us a peek into Emma's character arc, because we are going to watch her grow from a timid Titans lieutenant into a bold and righteous woman. Kamille and the AUG break out of the colony through the hole that they came in, and they escape Jared and the Titans when the Argama provides cover fire for them. Now we get to see some quick thinking by Kamille, who stops an air leak in his cockpit by tearing off a piece of his shirt and letting it drift to plug in the hole. It's such an insignificant scene in the grand scheme of things, but it helps add some cleverness and richness to Camille's character. Now the episode closes with a cool visual effect that's probably easy to ignore or even just write off as an animation error. But as they approach the Argama and the Gundam Mark II is hit by starlight, the black and blue paint job of the Titans is turned white, which visibly foreshadows the paint scheme that it's going to get in the hands of the AUG. I also like to think that this thematically expresses that the Gundam is no longer in the hands of the villains. It's a very neat little detail that I prefer to believe was done intentionally. After all, in the opening credits we've already seen the white version of the Mark II, so it's not like it's a spoiler. Finally, we get the cryptic line from Kamille that there's something very nostalgic about this. Now, there are so many different ways to interpret what he means here. For one, we have to determine what this he's referring to. Is it traveling in space? Is it the light pouring over the Gundam? Is it the whole experience of stealing the Gundam and then running away? Now, maybe the answer here is that Kamille is breaking the fourth wall and drawing the audience's attention to the many similarities between Amuro's experience at Side 7 and his own at Green Noah. Now, personally, I hate fourth wall breaks or winks and nods from characters to the audience, so I prefer to think that in the calm of space, now that his adrenaline has died down and he can reflect, that Camille's latent new type abilities, which we saw earlier between his hallucinations and his clairvoyant knowledge of Emma's name, are starting to really manifest. I think that when he's saying that he feels nostalgic, he's literally tapping into some kind of universal consciousness and reliving Amuro's experience. What Kamille is really describing is actually anemoia, which is a term used to describe nostalgia for a time that you've never known. Kamille is actually feeling nostalgic for Amuro's memory. At least that's how I interpret this moment. What do you think? So that concludes episode 2 of Zeta Gundam, and we are off to the races with some character building moments and some new type shenanigans. I promise we'll stop making comparisons to 0079 as soon as the story gets underway, but in these early episodes there's a lot to juxtapose and draw conclusions about. If you guys dig this series, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you later.